I never expected it to go this far. My stepdad, the man who was supposed to help me adjust, now stood so close I could feel his breath on my skin. His eyes locked onto mine, something unspoken hanging in the air between us. "Katherine," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "you have no idea how much I care about you." And just as I was about to give in, the door slammed open, my mom walked in. What happens next will change everything. Moving to New York was supposed to be the fresh start my mom promised me. After the divorce, everything felt like it was falling apart, my life, my sense of stability, my understanding of who I was. At 18, I thought I had it all figured out, but I was wrong. The city was overwhelming, the noise constant, the crowd suffocating. It wasn't like I'd imagined. It wasn't like the movies. The biggest struggle wasn't the city itself, though, it was finding my place in it. I didn't fit in with the locals, and the kids at my new college seemed to have their own little world. I was an outsider, just passing through. My mom, still caught up in the whirlwind of her new marriage to Roy, was rarely home. She worked long hours, trying to adjust to this new life just as much as I was. She had a new husband, a new job, and a new sense of purpose, while I was stuck feeling like the leftover pieces of someone else's puzzle. Roy, my stepdad, wasn't a bad guy. In fact, he was nice enough, successful businessman, older than my mom by almost 15 years, and, from what I could tell, genuinely interested in my mom's happiness. But I didn't know him, and I didn't want to. He had been around for only a couple of months, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong in their world. At first, I avoided him. He was well-meaning, always asking how I was settling in, offering to help with anything. But I kept myself busy. I didn't need anyone else's pity. I didn't want him to feel like he had to step in, like I was some lost cause. My mom was still adjusting to her new life, and I didn't want to burden her more than she already had. But the day it all changed was when I sat down at the kitchen table one evening, staring blankly at a notebook in front of me. I had a pile of work to catch up on from college, but my mind couldn't focus. I kept thinking about my old friends, my old life, and how much I hated this city. It wasn't just the physical distance, it was the emotional one. I felt so far away from everything that had once felt familiar. Roy walked in, casually flipping through some papers. He paused when he saw me, sitting there in the kitchen with the light from the lamp casting long shadows. "You okay?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. There was a softness to his voice, a concern that I wasn't used to hearing from him. I shrugged, not looking up. "I'm fine." He didn't press, just stepped closer, setting down his papers. "You know, you don't have to do this all alone, right?" I wasn't sure what he meant by that, but the way he said it made something in me stir. I hated the idea of him trying to fix me, but still, there was something in his tone that made me hesitate. "I'm not alone," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Roy didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. "How's college? Are you making friends?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Not really. It's hard. People don't really get me here." "I can imagine," he said sympathetically, his voice steady. "Big city, new faces, new everything." He leaned forward, his eyes soft. "But you've got to give it time. It's okay to take it slow." I looked up at him then, surprised by the honesty in his eyes. It was like he saw something in me that I couldn't quite see in myself. I could feel the weight of his gaze, but I didn't look away. For a second, I wanted to tell him everything, about how lost I felt, how distant I felt from my mom, how everything was just so different. But I didn't. Instead, I nodded. "I guess." Roy smiled, though it was a little sad. "I'm here if you want to talk, Katherine. I'm not just your stepdad. I know it's tough, but you're not alone in this." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to thank him, but another part of me didn't want to let him in. I was tired of people pitying me, but Roy wasn't like everyone else. There was something comforting about him, something genuine. "I'm fine," I said again, this time with a little more conviction. "I'll figure it out." Roy didn't push. He simply nodded. "All right. But the offer stands. You don't have to carry it all by yourself." And with that, he left the room, but I didn't feel as alone as I had before. Something about him, the way he spoke to me, the way he saw me without judging, made me feel seen. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to put up a wall, but I wasn't ready to let it down. Not yet. The next few days passed in a blur. I tried to focus on my work, but every time I sat down to study or write, my thoughts kept drifting to Roy. It wasn't just the fact that he had been kind to me, it was the way he seemed to understand without asking. The way he saw me, not as a problem to solve, but as someone who just needed a little space to figure things out. It felt strange and, in a way, comforting. The following Saturday, my mom was working again, and I found myself aimlessly wandering around the apartment, not sure what to do with myself. I thought about going out to explore the city, but I didn't feel like dealing with crowds or pretending to be okay. Instead, I ended up in the kitchen, staring at the leftover pizza in the fridge. Roy came in not long after, his briefcase in hand, looking like he had just come from a meeting. He paused when he saw me standing there, and for a moment, our eyes locked. It was like we were in some sort of silent understanding, both of us aware of the tension hanging in the air. "You look like you're lost in thought," he said, his voice light but with an underlying softness. He set his briefcase down on the counter and took a step toward me. "I'm just bored, I guess," I said, turning away to pull the pizza out of the fridge, hoping to avoid his gaze. "Mom's working again, and I don't know anyone here, so I'm just killing time." Roy watched me for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "You know, I've been meaning to ask if you'd like to go out. Grab a coffee or something? I know this place just down the block. It's quiet, relaxing. Thought you might enjoy it." I looked up, surprised. "You want to hang out with me?" I couldn't help the way my voice sounded, like I was questioning it, almost disbelieving. He chuckled softly, the sound warm and easy. "Why not? You're my stepdaughter, but I'm also just someone who's trying to make sure you're okay here. I figure a change of scenery might be good for both of us." I hesitated, not sure if I was ready to spend more time with him, especially after everything that had happened between us. But I was curious, too. Maybe it would help me figure out how I felt. Maybe it would help me feel less like an outsider. "Okay," I said, finally. "Sure, why not?" Roy's eyes brightened, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Great. Let's head out then." We walked to the cafe just a few blocks away. It was small and cozy, the kind of place that felt like a hidden gem. The air smelled like freshly brewed coffee, and the soft chatter of other customers added to the ambience. I followed Roy to a corner booth, my thoughts swirling. We ordered our drinks, coffee for him, tea for me, and sat down. For a while, we didn't speak much, just enjoying the quiet. I couldn't help but notice how comfortable I felt, just being with him, despite the unspoken tension between us. His presence was calming, and the way he listened to me made me feel like I wasn't just some confused teenager. He treated me like I had something worth saying. "You've been quiet today," Roy said after a while, his eyes studying me in a way that made my heart skip a beat. "Something on your mind?" I glanced at him, unsure of how to answer. My mind was full of so many things I hadn't shared with anyone. My old friends, my old life, the way I felt like I was drowning in this city. But I didn't want to burden him. He had enough to deal with. "It's just, everything's been different," I said slowly, trying to explain without saying too much. "I mean, this city, college, it's just a lot. I don't feel like I belong here." Roy nodded, taking a sip of his coffee before responding. "I get it. I was in your shoes once. It takes time to adjust, but you don't have to do it alone, you know. I'm here." His words were simple, but they hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed hard, trying to push back the wave of emotions that threatened to spill over. I had always been the one to keep things to myself, to shut people out when they tried to help. But with Roy, it was different. There was something about him that made me want to open up. I looked down at my tea, tracing the rim of the cup with my finger. "It's just hard. I don't know how to fit in. I feel like everyone already has their group, and I'm just on the outside." Roy leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "It's natural to feel that way. Starting over in a new place is never easy. But remember, this is your journey. You get to decide how it goes. And you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be yourself." I smiled faintly, appreciating his words. But there was still that knot in my chest, that feeling of uncertainty that I couldn't shake. "You really think it'll get better?" I asked, not sure why I was asking him, but feeling like I needed to hear it from someone who wasn't my mom. Roy's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen before, something that made my heart race. "I do," he said, his voice steady. "It's not going to be easy, but I know you're stronger than you think. You'll find your way." I looked at him, really looked at him, and in that moment, I felt a connection I couldn't explain. It wasn't just the words. It was the way he said them, the way he made me feel like I wasn't alone, like I mattered. But then, just as quickly as the moment arrived, it was gone. I forced myself to look away, suddenly feeling embarrassed by the way my heart was reacting. "Thanks," I mumbled, trying to regain my composure. Roy smiled again, a knowing look in his eyes, but he didn't press. "Anytime, Katherine. Anytime." The next week passed in a blur of classes, late-night study sessions, and quiet evenings at home. It wasn't that things had suddenly gotten better, but I had found a strange sense of comfort in the routine of it all. Every now and then, I would run into Roy in the kitchen or the living room, and he would greet me with that easy smile, asking how my day went or suggesting we do something, grab coffee, take a walk, just talk. I couldn't deny it. Spending time with Roy felt different from anything I had experienced since moving here. There was a part of me that resisted it, that tried to convince myself that I was simply grateful for his attention because my mom was so busy. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. On Friday afternoon, after another grueling week of adjusting to life in New York, I found myself sitting on the couch in the living room, trying to focus on an article for class, but my mind kept wandering. I wasn't sure why, but my thoughts kept drifting back to our little coffee outing a few days ago. The way Roy had looked at me when I opened up, the way his voice had softened as he tried to reassure me. I had been pushing away these thoughts, trying to tell myself that it was just kindness, that it was nothing more. But I couldn't deny that something had shifted between us. It wasn't just that he was a good stepdad, it was the way he listened, the way he cared about how I felt. It was the way he made me feel important when I had never felt so insignificant. Before I could spiral further, the door opened, and Roy stepped inside. He had his coat off, his tie loosened, looking slightly disheveled but still every bit the professional businessman I had gotten used to seeing. I looked up at him, offering a small smile. "Hey," I said, not sure how I was feeling. "You're home early." Roy smiled back, setting his briefcase down on the coffee table. "Yeah, thought I'd get a head start on the weekend," he said casually, taking a seat next to me on the couch. "What are you up to?" I shrugged, trying to appear like I was absorbed in the article, though I was barely able to concentrate. "Just reading. Trying to catch up on some stuff for school. You know, you've been working hard. Maybe you deserve a break," he said, his voice smooth, as though he was offering a suggestion, but also something more. I looked over at him, raising an eyebrow. "A break?" I repeated, trying to hide the smile that tugged at the corner of my mouth. "You mean from school? That's all I do these days." He chuckled lightly, his eyes glinting with something unspoken. "Sometimes it's good to step away for a bit. How about we go out for dinner tonight? Just the two of us. I know a great place just around the corner." The invitation caught me off guard. I hadn't expected him to offer, and for a moment, I hesitated. It felt strange. Spending time alone with him felt both comforting and, at the same time, like a line was being crossed. But something about the way he looked at me, his expression warm but not forced, made it impossible to say no. "I guess I could use a break," I said slowly, setting the article aside and standing up. "Okay, why not?" Roy's face brightened, and there was a shift in his demeanor. He stood up as well, offering me a hand. "Good. I'll grab my jacket." As we made our way out the door, I tried to push away the strange feeling that had settled in my stomach. It wasn't just about the dinner. It was the way Roy made me feel when we spent time together. The way he looked at me, the way his presence filled the space. I couldn't ignore it, no matter how hard I tried. The restaurant was just a few blocks away. It was a cozy place, with dim lighting and quiet music playing in the background. We sat at a small table by the window, the evening lights of the city flickering outside. It felt intimate, but not in a way that was uncomfortable, just enough to make the air feel heavy with unspoken thoughts. We talked about everything and nothing. I told him more about school, about the classes I was taking, the people I had met, the things that frustrated me. He listened intently, offering advice and support in his calm, steady way. It felt like he genuinely cared about my struggles, not just as my stepfather, but as someone who understood what it was like to feel out of place. At some point, I found myself laughing. It wasn't forced. It was the kind of laughter that came naturally, without thinking about it. Roy smiled, and there was something in the way his eyes softened that made my heart skip a beat. For a moment, I didn't care about the nagging voice in the back of my mind that warned me this was dangerous. All I could focus on was the way he made me feel, the way his presence made the rest of the world fade away. When dinner ended, Roy insisted on walking me home. The streets were quiet, the city bustling around us, but the two of us seemed to exist in our own little bubble. There was something about the night, something about the way Roy kept glancing at me, that made everything feel more intense. We reached the apartment building, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I wasn't sure what to say. The tension between us felt so thick, so palpable, that it made my pulse quicken. "Well, thanks for dinner," I said softly, looking up at him. Roy smiled again, but this time it was different. It was a smile that carried an unspoken understanding. "Anytime, Katherine." I'm glad we did this." For a moment, I thought he might say something else, but instead, he simply nodded and turned to leave. As I watched him walk away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. Something I wasn't ready for, but something that was undeniably there. The days that followed that dinner felt like they were stretching on forever. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The way Roy had looked at me when we were sitting across from each other at that tiny cafe, the way his smile had lingered just a little too long, the connection I had felt, the way he made me feel seen and heard, left me in a whirlwind of emotions I wasn't prepared to face. I found myself thinking about him more than I should have, and it was starting to get confusing. I had always considered him nothing more than my mom's new husband, my stepfather, someone who was part of this new life I didn't want. But now, after spending that evening with him, I couldn't ignore the way he made me feel. It was like something had shifted between us, something I couldn't explain or control, and that scared me. For the next few days, I kept my distance, retreating to my room when I wasn't at college. I didn't want to face Roy, didn't want to have that conversation I was dreading, whatever that conversation might be. I wasn't sure what I wanted from him, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending that things felt normal. But Roy wasn't giving up. He kept finding small ways to be around, like leaving a note for me on the kitchen counter, asking how my day was or if I wanted to grab coffee. It was subtle, but the more I tried to avoid him, the more he reached out. He was patient, and I could see that he genuinely wanted to be there for me, not just as a stepfather, but as someone I could rely on. One afternoon, I was sitting in the living room, staring at my phone and wondering if I was overthinking everything when I heard a knock on the door. I hadn't expected anyone. I got up slowly, hesitating before opening it. When I did, there stood Roy, looking at me with that same quiet intensity one had come to recognize. "Hey," he said softly, his hands shoved in his pockets. "Got a minute?" I was about to say something, maybe brush him off again, but instead I nodded. "Yeah, sure," I said, stepping aside to let him in. He walked in, glancing around the room as if making sure I was okay before he spoke again. "I thought we could go for a walk, maybe talk for a bit," he suggested. His tone was casual, but there was something in the way he said it that made me pause. It was like he wasn't just asking as a stepdad, but as someone who wanted to know what was really going on inside my head. I wanted to say no. I wanted to avoid whatever conversation this was heading toward, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I grabbed my jacket and followed him out the door. We walked in silence for a while, the streets of New York bustling around us, but the quiet between us was louder than anything else. I didn't know what to say. My mind was a mess of thoughts, half-formed questions, and emotions I wasn't ready to confront. I could feel Roy walking beside me, his presence steady and constant, and for some reason, it made my heart race. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Roy spoke, breaking the silence. "I know something's been off between us lately," he said quietly, his voice gentle. "I want to make sure you're okay. Really okay." I glanced at him, unsure of how to respond. I wanted to tell him everything, the way I felt lost, the way I was struggling to adjust to everything in my life, how his presence in my life had made me feel safe, and how confused I was by it all. But I couldn't. It felt too raw, too personal to say out loud. Instead, I just shrugged, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know. It's just been hard. I feel like I don't belong here, like I'm just drifting." Roy stopped walking, and I instinctively did the same. He turned to face me, his eyes serious now, not a hint of the casual, easygoing man he usually was. "Katherine," he said, his voice low and steady, "I get it. I do. This isn't easy, and it takes time, but you're not alone. You don't have to go through this by yourself. You can talk to me whenever you need to." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat growing. His words were comforting, but they made something stir inside me, something I wasn't ready to acknowledge. "I don't want to be a burden," I said quietly, my voice breaking slightly. "I don't want to make everything harder for you and Mom." Roy reached out, placing a hand gently on my arm, his touch warm and reassuring. "You're not a burden, Katherine. You never were. I care about you, and I know things are complicated, but you don't have to carry all this weight by yourself." I looked up at him, feeling the intensity of his gaze on me. For a moment, I wanted to tell him everything, to let him in, to let him see how much I was struggling. But as much as I wanted that connection, a part of me held back. I nodded slowly, trying to steady my breath. "Thanks, Roy. I just don't know how to handle all of this." Roy smiled softly, his hand giving my arm a reassuring squeeze before he took a step back. "You'll figure it out, one step at a time." We stood there for a few more moments, just looking at each other. The tension between us was undeniable, but neither of us said anything more. As we began walking again, I couldn't help but feel like something was different between us. Something deeper. And for the first time since I'd moved here, I didn't feel so alone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that what we were starting to build was dangerous, too close, too complicated, and too risky. The next few days felt heavier, as though the unspoken tension between Roy and I was growing with every glance, every small conversation. Every time I saw him, I felt that familiar pull, but now it was stronger, impossible to ignore. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that he was just being kind, just being a good stepdad. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It had to be. One evening, a few days after our walk, Roy came into the living room after dinner. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through a book, though I wasn't really reading. My mind kept drifting back to him. He leaned against the doorframe, looking at me with that same quiet intensity that made everything inside me stir. "Katherine," he said softly, his voice carrying a note of hesitation. "Can we talk for a minute?" I looked up at him, my heart skipping a beat. I didn't know what it was about his presence, but when he spoke to me like that, it felt like everything else faded away. I nodded, though my hands trembled slightly as I set the book aside. "Sure," I said, trying to sound calm, though I wasn't sure I could manage it. He stepped into the room, sitting down next to me on the couch. The proximity felt different now, too close, too much. My heart was racing, and I couldn't seem to slow my breathing. "I've been thinking," he began, his eyes meeting mine, his voice steady. "About everything. About how things have been between us." My stomach tightened. The way he looked at me, so serious, so focused, made me feel like I was under a microscope. I didn't know where this was going, but I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. "You don't have to say anything if you don't want to," Roy continued, his voice lowering. "But I want you to know that whatever it is, whatever's going on with us, I'm here, for you, always." I swallowed hard, unable to find the words. I had been so careful to keep my distance, to keep my feelings hidden, but they were starting to overwhelm me. The truth was, I did want to tell him. I wanted to tell him how I felt, how every moment we spent together seemed to pull me in deeper. But I couldn't. I wasn't ready to face the truth of it. Instead, I just nodded, my throat tight. I don't know what to say, Roy." He looked at me, his gaze softening. "You don't have to say anything, but I want you to know that I care about you, Katherine, more than you might think." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and unspoken. It was as if the world had stopped, leaving only us in that moment. I felt like I was teetering on the edge of something I wasn't sure I could handle, something that could shatter everything I knew. Roy's hand moved slowly, and before I could stop myself, I felt the warmth of his fingers on mine. My breath caught in my throat, my pulse quickening at the simple, yet intimate contact. He didn't let go, his hand resting gently over mine, as if giving me a chance to pull away if I needed to. But I didn't. I didn't know why, but I didn't want to. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't pretend that things haven't changed between us. I don't know what this is, but I can't keep pretending it's not there." I didn't know how to respond. I felt like my entire body was on fire, and I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just the physical closeness, it was the emotional connection that was becoming harder to ignore. Everything inside me screamed that this wasn't right, but a part of me longed for it. Longed for him. "I don't know what I feel either," I finally whispered, my voice shaky. "But I can't stop thinking about you, and it scares me." Roy's gaze softened even more, his fingers tightening gently around mine, as if to reassure me. "It scares me too," he admitted, his voice so low that I almost didn't hear him. "But that doesn't change how I feel." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I wanted to pull away, to pretend this conversation wasn't happening, but the connection between us felt so intense, so raw, that I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was caught between wanting to run and wanting to let him in completely. And then, just as the moment reached its peak, my phone rang, breaking the spell. My mom's name flashed on the screen. I jumped, almost dropping the phone in my haste to answer it. My hands were shaking, and my heart was still pounding from everything that had just happened. I stood up quickly, pulling my hand away from Roy's, and answered the call. "Hey, Mom." Roy didn't move, but I could feel his eyes on me, the space between us suddenly too wide. I spoke quickly, trying to regain some semblance of control over myself. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just working on some stuff. How's work?" But I couldn't focus. The moment with Roy, the words we had shared, were still buzzing in my head. I wasn't sure what had just happened, but I knew one thing: everything between Roy and me had changed, and I didn't know how to stop it. When I ended the call, I turned to face him, but he was already standing up. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that told me he wasn't ready to let this go either. "I think we should take things slow," he said quietly, his voice a little rough. "But whatever happens, I want you to know you're not alone, Katherine. Not now. Not ever." I nodded, not trusting myself to say anything. The weight of the moment was too much. I couldn't handle it, but I also couldn't deny the way I felt. As Roy walked out of the room, I collapsed back onto the couch, my mind a whirl of emotions I didn't know how to process. One thing was clear: we had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The following days felt like an emotional roller coaster. The tension between Roy and I, which had been building for weeks, was now impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the moments when we were alone, or the way he would look at me like I was more than just his stepdaughter. It was everything. The silence, the unspoken understanding, the magnetic pull that had developed between us. It was like we were trapped in this limbo, both of us afraid to say the words, afraid to take the next step. I tried to distract myself. I threw myself into my studies, stayed out of the house whenever I could, and even spent a little more time with my mom, though it was hard to get her attention with everything she had going on. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was spiraling. Every time I saw Roy, my heart would race. I hated that I couldn't control it, that I couldn't push away the feelings that were growing inside me. Every word he spoke to me, every glance, every touch, it all felt loaded with something deeper, something I wasn't ready to confront. It all came to a head one evening when my mom was working late again. I was sitting in the living room, flipping through my notes, but I wasn't really paying attention. My thoughts kept drifting to Roy, as they always did. I could feel his presence in every corner of the apartment, even when he wasn't there. I heard the sound of footsteps approaching, and my pulse quickened before I even saw him. It was like my body knew, instinctively, that it was him. Roy appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He was dressed casually, his shirt slightly wrinkled from a long day, but he still looked effortlessly put together. I could feel the weight of the moment hanging between us, like the air had thickened somehow. He paused when he saw me, his gaze lingering just a little too long. "You're still working?" he asked softly, his voice low, almost cautious. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just trying to get ahead." He didn't say anything else, but his eyes softened as he crossed the room and sat down on the couch beside me. For a moment, we sat there in silence, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. I could feel the warmth of his body so close to mine, and my breath caught in my throat. It was like time had stopped, like we were frozen in this moment, unable to move forward or backward. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," he said after a while, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I don't want to make things harder for you. I know it's complicated." I turned to look at him, my heart hammering in my chest. "It's not just you," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "It's me too. I don't know what I'm feeling, but I can't stop thinking about you, Roy." His eyes darkened, and for a moment, I thought he might pull away, that he would retreat like he had done before. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned closer, his face just inches from mine. My pulse quickened, and I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for him to do something, to say something. "I know," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I feel it too. But we can't keep pretending it's nothing. I don't want to hurt you, Katherine. I don't want to make things worse." I didn't know what to say. I could feel my heart racing, my thoughts scattered, and for a moment, all I wanted was to close the space between us. The desire to feel his touch, to know what it would be like to cross that line, was overwhelming. But there was a part of me, deep down, that knew this could change everything. It wasn't just a fleeting feeling, it was real, and it was dangerous. But just as I was about to say something, to do something that would break the silence, Roy's phone rang. The sound of it cut through the tension like a knife. He pulled back, looking at the screen before answering it quickly. "Hey, babe," he said into the phone, his voice calm, but I could hear the slight edge of tension in it. "Yeah, I'll be home soon." He paused, glancing at me. "No, it's fine. I'm just taking care of something. I'll talk to you later." He hung up, his expression unreadable. I could feel the distance between us growing again, and I hated it. He stood up, running a hand through his hair. "I should go," he said, his voice soft. "We'll figure this out, Katherine. But we need time. We need to think about this. Think about what it means." I nodded, though I didn't feel like I had any control over what was happening. My thoughts were spinning, my emotions tangled in a web I didn't know how to escape. Roy took a step toward the door, but then paused, turning back to me. "I'll be here when you're ready to talk," he said quietly. "But we can't keep doing this. Not like this." I watched him leave, my heart heavy, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. I didn't know what I wanted anymore, but I knew one thing for sure. Things had changed. Between us, between me and my mom. And I didn't know how to put the pieces back together.